the United States was pushing on open doors, that both sides were seeking off-ramps to the escalation. Most presidents come into office without a lot of knowledge about South Asia. Pakistan, this is an existential issue in a way that it may not be for India. I view the Pakistan Army as an insurgent organization. These terrorist attacks achieve many of the objectives for the Pakistan Army.
Welcome to the New Indian Express's Worldview. I am Amitava, Sanyal, opinion editor, and with me is also Jayanth Jacob, our diplomatic editor. And with us today is a distinguished guest joining us from Washington, US, Professor Carol Christine Fair. She's a professor of security studies at Georgetown University's Edmund Walsh School of Foreign Services. She earned her PhD in South Asian Studies from the University of Chicago in 2004 and has since done extensive work all over South Asia. She's the author and editor of a number of books on the region and is conversant in Hindi, Urdu, and Punjabi. Did we get that right, Professor Fair?
Ji, bilkul.
Let's begin with what seems to be on the headlines right away. There are various pictures being projected about how the ceasefire was worked upon. India, Pakistan, US, even Turkey has put in its sort of claim. What is the clearest picture that we can get of how it was wrought?
So I don't honestly think right now we have a clear picture. The White House has said some things that seem pretty dubious. The Indians have, for example, not accepted many of the things that Trump has said. I'm not familiar with Turkey's claim. We know that Saudi Arabia's efforts were largely failed. So I don't really know clearly how the ceasefire came to be. But my understanding is that the United States was pushing on open doors, that both sides were seeking off-ramps to the escalation.
Right. Now, Trump hasn't even appointed an ambassador to India and to other key posts in the National Security Council or the State Department.
Correct.
Is that something that translates into him being briefed in an insufficient, inadequate manner on what is India's strategic position in the whole foreign affairs framework within the US administration? Has that got something to do with the way? Sorry.
So I think that's true, but let's just speak before we talk about the particularities of Trump, let's talk about the generalities. With the exception of President Biden, who had spent 8 years as vice president, most presidents come into office without a lot of knowledge about South Asia. Their staff don't have a lot of knowledge about South Asia. And so what we're seeing with President Trump's administration would be very typical of a new president. George W. Bush didn't have a clue about South Asia when 9/11 happened, and they had to scramble. So this is a very common situation with new presidencies. Now, what we do know of the people that Trump has appointed to his cabinet is that they're not knowledgeable experts. They're appointed there because of chaploosi. You know, basically they do chaploosi to him. They don't inform him, they do chaploosi. And we see this, photos of his cabinet meeting where everyone has the obnoxious MAGA hats. This is the kind of stuff that we expect of North Korea, not what we expect, for example, of the United States. So I think to your point, it's absolutely true. And it's particularly poignant for the Trump administration, given that they don't have a lot of expertise elsewhere in the administration. And I might add, I will say that we do have an appointment for the Assistant Secretary of State, that's Paul Kapoor. I personally repose a lot of confidence in Paul Kapoor, and it's incredibly unfortunate that he hasn't been confirmed before this crisis. And I hope that this crisis will escalate the timeline for his confirmation, but I have no idea if that will be the case.
You have talked about Paul Kapoor elsewhere too. Jayanth?
Professor Fair, if I can ask you, you have seen the Indian briefing and the American briefing, Pakistani briefing about the particular strike, Operation Sindoor. So do you think this kind of a strike this time, is it deterrent enough to stop cross-border terrorism? What is your understanding of the situation?
No. And the reason is for Pakistan, this is an existential issue in a way that it may not be for India. For the Pakistan Army, I view the Pakistan Army as an insurgent organization. It can't conventionally defeat India, but how does an insurgent show that it hasn't been defeated is by episodically conducting terrorist attacks. And so these terrorist attacks achieve many of the objectives for the Pakistan Army. One, they show that there is no peace in the valley, right? This is a key strategic objective of the Pakistanis. When these strikes happen, the Indians strengthen their counterinsurgency grid. They are increasingly repressive towards the local Kashmiris. This increases the distance between Kashmiris and the government that claims to represent them. This is also a strategic goal. In the case of Army Chief Munir and the army at present, prior to this conflict, it was under considerable disrepute in Pakistan over the way it had treated Imran Khan. All of that disrepute has evaporated. Now, it will likely come back over the months to come because it doesn't structurally solve the issue that Pakistani support Imran Khan, and the army wants to keep him locked away forever. But for the short term, this attack really did achieve many of Pakistan's objectives. And that's true irrespective of what may have happened in the battle space.
Well, Professor Philip, we can ask you a follow-up question. Then what it will take for Pakistan to stop cross-border terrorism? Is it ever possible that Pakistan stops doing this?
I don't think it's possible at a risk that India is willing to take. I believe that this is only possible with the complete dismemberment of the Pakistan Army, and that can only be achieved through a full war in which Pakistan is decisively defeated. India and Pakistan don't have the capacity to defeat either country because of the forces along the IB and the LOC are pretty evenly distributed. India's advantages only kick in during a long war, and a long war is going to be too risky with respect to nuclear escalation. So I'm pretty sympathetic to the plight of the Indians. It doesn't seem really possible, in my estimation, to stop Pakistani adventurism. And I will add, it's not as if India is not doing anything. India is also engaging in its own sub-conventional operations in Pakistan itself. What I think would be more effective than these provocative strikes, however, is a successful leadership decapitation of the terrorist groups. And so far, I'm assuming, there have been reports that India has tried, but obviously the proof is in the pudding. India has not succeeded. But I think that would actually be more successful than these provocative strikes propounded by this new doctrine.
In your book on Lashkar-e-Toiba, in their own words, you very clearly paint a picture of an organization which is, you call them duteous to the Pakistani government establishment. And they are indispensable, you're saying, they are sort of wedded to each other. You also talk a bit about, just mention Jaish-e-Mohammed. For our viewers, can you tell us why this came about? You have given the history. That's not what you're looking for. But why is this sort of what you just said, that you would rather go for the decapitation of the terrorist network's leadership? So given that Jaish and Lashkar are the two main ones aimed at India, a bit about the difference and why the two exist and why they're indispensable to the Pakistani establishment.
Yeah, they exist for very different reasons. So Lashkar-e-Taiba has been very duteous to the state in the sense that it only operates outside of Pakistan. Lashkar-e-Taiba has never conducted a single attack within Pakistan. Thanks to the ISI, you don't see splits either in Lashkar-e-Taiba that you see in some of the other groups. So one of the reasons why Pakistan relies upon groups like Lashkar and Jaish is there's always plausible deniability. Not always, but sometimes there's plausible deniability. We see this in the Pahalgam attack. There was no smoking gun. Unlike in Pulwama, we had a Jaish-e-Mohammed suicide bomber with a suicide bomber video. And that was a smoking gun, right? But in Pahalgam, we didn't have a smoking gun. We had Resistance Front, a proxy organization for Lashkar, initially take credit, then say that credit was because their attack was their account had been hacked and so forth. So usually, these groups confer the advantage of plausible deniability. Domestically, Lashkar-e-Taiba is important because it opposes the Deobandi organizations that are targeting Pakistanis in the state such as the Pakistani Taliban, Lashkar-e-Jhangvi, and Sip-e-Saba. It also opposes the ethnic terrorists, for example, in Balochistan, which I have to say, in the same way that many Indians believe terrorists, Pakistani hand is behind every act of terrorism and every stone thrown in Kashmir, Pakistanis believe that there's an Indian hand behind these attacks in Balochistan and behind the TTP attack. So it's really important to note that. So it not only does it oppose these Deobandi groups, it also is an active proselytizer of this LA Hadith creed that Lashkar-e-Taiba propounds. And this creed is anti-instability of the state. Lashkar-e-Taiba also propounds narratives that are favorable to the Pakistan Army. So a colleague of mine, we just translated this book and wrote an article. It's available on my website that looks at the way in which Lashkar-e-Taiba basically does propaganda for the Pakistan Army. So Lashkar-e-Taiba is important domestically, but also with regard to the Pakistani state's policy of using jihad as a tool of foreign policy. Jaish-e-Mohammed is different. Jaish-e-Mohammed is Deobandi. Jaish-e-Mohammed had a big split in membership back at the very end of 2001. In fact, most of the members of Jaish-e-Mohammed defected to another organization that began attacking the state. So the Pakistan Army and the ISI really invested in Masood Azhar's, the rump of his organization. And the reason is most of the militant groups attacking Pakistan, including the Islamic State, are Deobandi in their origins. And so Jaish-e-Mohammed, which I can't say, the organization itself only attacks in India, but also in Afghanistan. But some of its spin-off organizations do conduct violence in the state. And so Jaish-e-Mohammed is sort of a Harvapasi program for wayward Deobandi terrorists. So the Pakistan Army and the ISI likes to encourage these domestic terrorists who are Deobandi to rejoin Jaish-e-Mohammed so that they can kill Indians.
And what was the reason behind this thing, the resistance front, which seemed to come out of nowhere and then, as you pointed out, stepped back? There have been various theories about it. Why did they have to put it up and then roll it back?
I mean, I don't have a particular theory. I don't know why they did it. It could have been fog of war. It could have been misjudgment. It could have been that they were told to not take credit for it. So I don't have a theory, and certainly I don't have evidence for any theory.
Right. Jayanth?
Professor, if I can ask you some other means. For example, India has been trying to corner this cross-border terrorism issue and isolate Pakistan at the international forum, but it hasn't really worked so far. So you know all these dealings, what has happened under 1269 committee, etc. Do you think, is there some coordinated, effective strategy that India is lacking, or the world is the way it is?
So look, I don't blame India for this. I blame the world. Right. So here's also the crude fact. In the same way that Pakistan uses its nuclear weapons to generate risk for India in the way in which we've seen, right? As soon as the attack on Nur Khan happened, the international community stepped into action. Even the United States stepped into action just the day before. J.D. Vance said there was no inherent American interest in this conflict. But as soon as the strike on Nur Khan happened, that tune changed. So in the same way that Pakistan uses its nuclear weapons to coerce India, it also uses its nuclear weapons to coerce the international community. More than anything, the international community believes that Pakistan is too dangerous to fail, in large measure because of those nuclear weapons. So we all know the kahani of Pakistan being on the gray list, the FATF gray list. It was never on the black list, as it so richly deserved. And then it was magically removed from the gray list, just as its economy was entering into a free fall. So the reason why it was never put on the blacklist, and why it will never be put on the blacklist, howsoever it may deserve to be on the blacklist, is that once it's there, it doesn't have access to IMF money. And Pakistan can't exist financially without IMF bailouts. So in essence, the world is too afraid of Pakistan's failure to undertake any kind of punitive regime along the lines that we're seeing, for example, a raid against Russia. The world is just too afraid of Pakistan failing. Now, I'm of the belief that Pakistan won't fail. I've spent a lot of time in Pakistan before they kicked me out. And what I've seen in Pakistan is an enormous resilience. And I think what happened to India, for example, in 1990, when it had a huge foreign exchange crisis that galvanized widespread reforms that gave the way to the economic growth that India has exhibited since then, I think Pakistan is being denied that moment when confronted with economic insolvency, it would have to undertake the reforms that would be needed to make the state viable. So the international community makes sure that Pakistan never has to face that moment. I'm convinced that if confronted with that moment, Pakistan would do what it needs to do. So in short, I can't fault India. I fault the international community. And I will point out this was another success of this conflict. India, Pakistan was rehyphenated in most of the global capitals. Even Vladimir Putin rehyphenated India and Pakistan. The US rehyphenated India and Pakistan. They essentially acknowledged the legitimacy of the Kashmir dispute, which was a huge loss for India, but a huge victory for Pakistan.
The China-Pakistan relationship has blossomed a lot ever since Kargil 1999 and the various skirmishes that have happened since. What do you think it means for a future? Even this one, we saw how the Chinese poured over the Chinese use of Chinese weapons and how they basically tested their weapons at no loss of theirs and saw the efficacy. What does it mean for a possible all-out future action front?
So I think Indians really, so as Indians are drawing lessons from this conflict, I imagine that one of the lessons that they're seeking to draw out is what does it mean for an Indo-Chinese conflict? So for example, if India really did lose between 2 and 5 aircraft, as most outside analysts believe is the case, and the explanation for that appeared to be the superior radar of the Chinese aircraft. I hope that Indians are really reflecting upon what does this mean for a potential China-India conflict, not just what does this mean for future India-Pakistan conflicts. I'm not an avionics expert, so I don't feel like it's my place to invey further on that issue.
Sure. Well, we have seen New York Times recently reporting in depth how the Houthis, with
Correct.
whatever armor they have, even after being pounded for so long, almost took out those F-fighter jets of US, and that was one of the triggers for Trump to pull out and then claim victory. How do you see, given that there is also the overhang of the whole trade tariff entanglement, the negotiations that are going on, and the deadline, as the deadline draws near, Trump's self-imposed deadline, how do you see that working on geopolitics in the next month or couple of months?
I mean, as an American who's living through this with white knuckles, I wish I could tell you, but it just seems to be who is giving him money, like who's buying him out. That seems to be like Trump has, for example, his opinion on Qatar was incredibly pejorative, right? And an old tweet is circulating about his pejorative views of Qatar. But Qatar, why am I saying Qatar? I know how to say the damn name, Qatar. But Qatar is giving him a $400 million jet, and now Qatar is his best friend. And I believe there's some golf deal that's behind that. So it's really hard to know what he's going to do with this tariff issue because so much of it seems to be viable.
Right, just transactional, is it?
It's just with him, it's all transactional. You know, it's one of the most corrupt enterprises that we've had in U.S. history. We've never had a president exhibit corruption on this scale, complete unchecked corruption. The Republican Party is just genuflux to him. They have enabled the worst. This Pam Bondi blessing of the $400 million Qatar jet is not how it works. It requires an act of Congress to allow him to take possession of this jet. We haven't seen that yet. And I guarantee you, if there were to be an act of Congress, it would be in Trump's favor. I mean, Hillary Clinton couldn't accept a $400 necklace from Bangladesh.
Yeah, true. Jayanth?
Professor Fair, if I can ask you, for example, a lot of things are happening in South Asia. Do you think the Trump administration will be spending a lot of time in this region between conflicts, what is happening between India and Pakistan, what is happening in Bangladesh?
Yeah. So, I mean, basically personnel is policy, and right now we don't have any personnel. So without seeing personnel in place, it's really quite difficult to say what the Trump administration is going to do in South Asia, if anything. If Paul Kapoor is onboarded and he becomes the Assistant Secretary of State, I think he'll be very good for the India-US relationship. He will not be very salubrious for the US-Pakistan relationship. And he's not remotely knowledgeable about Bangladesh. That's just not a country that's in his bailiwick. So I can't say what that would mean for the US-Bangladesh relations.
How do you see the Bangladesh situation playing out with Awami League being banned away from the US say in the matter? But how is that playing out? You have written on it knowledgeably, you've worked there, you know it well. That's how we pose the question.
Yeah, so look, I know the Indians repose a lot of confidence in Sheikh Hasina and the Awami League, but she was horrible. Let me tell you, she was an oppressive autocrat. Under her, democratic norms were trenched considerably. The Indians knew that. The Indians were perfectly happy to live with democratic repression and diminution of democratic freedoms, as long as she did what the Indians wanted, which was crack down on Islamist terror. I long told the Indians, this is not sustainable. This is not going to, this is going to work in the short term, but it's not sustainable. And I was right. It wasn't sustainable. Now we are, and in fact, by the nature of this change of government, we have brought back the worst of Bangladeshi political elements. The BNP and the Jamaat Islami are thoroughly back driving the truck. And it was just a question of time. It wasn't a question of whether that the Awami League was going to be banned. So from my point of view, this is very unfortunate because the reason why we're in this situation right now with Bangladesh, how it came to be, was that the Awami League foisted this constitution upon the Bangladeshis without consultation. The secularism, as the Awami League purported it in the Constitution, was not the result of broad-based consultation. It was the result of a party that had just come victorious from war. So in some sense, what they're doing is that they are repeating a process using different winners than what happened in 1971. And it's not going to be any more broad-based or consensual than the initial Constitution was in 1971. So I am very concerned about this, and I'm also very concerned. I don't spend as much time in Bangladesh as I do in India, for example, but I did do a Fulbright in Chittagong University, and I was able to witness firsthand in Chittagong the presence of the Jamaat Islami, but I was also able to witness firsthand the complete terror that people felt at Sheikh Hasina. So the outcome of this is not going to be great for Bangladeshis or Indians or for anyone else for that matter in the region. People that are going to do well are, of course, is Bangladesh's private sector. Bangladesh has a thriving economy. It's an economy that is enviable. They are going to be hit pretty hard by the tariffs. However, their competitors have been hit harder by the tariffs. And I don't get the impression that Trump is terribly disposed to negotiate with Bangladesh. The Bangladeshis are hopeful that they can negotiate some deal on the tariffs. I'm a little bit skeptical that that's going to happen. But yeah, I am not looking. I'm not looking at the developments in Bangladesh with a lot of enthusiasm.
Thanks a lot for your time, Professor Fair. It's been illuminating as ever, and also fun
Thank you.
talking to you.
You're kind. You're kind. Thank you.
Now,